It wasn't the pain that broke her. Laurel Hutchins had prepared for pain. She had read the books, attended the classes, downloaded the apps that timed contractions to the second. What she hadn't prepared for was the silence on the other end of the phone when she called her husband and heard his voicemail pick up. Again. For the fourth time in 2 hours, Mrs. Hutchins. The nurse's voice cut through the fog. Your blood pressure is climbing. I need you to focus on your breathing. Laurel tried. She stared at the water stain on the ceiling tile above her bed and breathed the way she'd practiced. In for 4 counts, out for 4 counts. But her eyes kept drifting to the door. The empty doorway where her husband was supposed to be standing. They had a plan. She would call when the contractions were 5 minutes apart. He would leave work immediately, he had promised. He had put his hand on her rounded belly 3 weeks ago and said, I will be there. Nothing is going to keep me away. His name was Derek Hutchins and he was 38 minutes away by highway. She had called him at 6:14 p.m. It was now 8:47. The contractions were no longer 5 minutes apart. Is there anyone else we can contact? The nurse asked gently. She had a kind face, the kind that had delivered enough bad news to know how to soften it in advance. My sister, Laurel said. Call my sister. Her sister Pamela arrived in 22 minutes. She burst through the door still wearing her grocery store apron, a smear of something on her forearm, eyes red from crying before she'd even walked in. She grabbed Laurel's hand and didn't let go. Where is he? Pamela asked. I don't know, Laurel said. And the terrifying part was that she meant it. The labor went hard and fast after that. The doctor, a soft-spoken man named Dr. Callahan, kept his voice even and professional, but Laurel could read the tension in his jaw. She was hemorrhaging. Not catastrophically, not yet, but enough. Enough that someone called for the crash cart to be moved closer. Enough that the room went from 2 nurses to 5 in the space of a breath. Through the window in the door, just a small rectangle of reinforced glass, she could see the waiting room, fluorescent lights, a vending machine, 2 chairs pushed together, and then she saw the woman. She was standing near the vending machine. Tall with dark hair pulled back, wearing a blazer that looked like it belonged to an office meeting rather than a hospital hallway. She was looking toward the delivery room. Not pacing, not wringing her hands, just looking, with an expression that Laurel, even through the fog of pain and medication, recognized immediately. Satisfaction. The woman was watching the chaos in that delivery room, the extra nurses, the crash cart, the doctor's tight jaw, and she looked satisfied. Laurel blinked and her vision tunneled. Someone was calling her name. The ceiling swam. She heard the monitor beside her change tone, going long and flat, and then she didn't hear anything at all. She woke up to a headache that lived behind her eyes and a tube in her arm, and her sister's hand wrapped around hers so tightly she could feel Pamela's pulse. Hey, Pamela leaned forward immediately. Hey, you're here, you're okay. The baby, Laurel said. Her throat felt scraped raw. Pamela's face crumpled and then rearranged itself into something fierce and determined. She's okay, she's in the NICU, she's small but she's okay. They're calling her a fighter. A pause. She needs a name. They've been calling her Baby Hutchins. Closed her eyes. Not Hutchins, she said, not anymore. It took her a moment to understand why she'd said that, and then she remembered the waiting room. The woman by the vending machine. The look on her face. Pamela. Laurel's voice came out steadier than she expected. Where's Derek? The silence that followed was its own kind of answer. He came, Pamela finally said, about an hour after they stabilized you. He stayed for maybe 40 minutes, then he left. She stopped. Then, because she had never been the kind of person who softened things when the truth was needed, he wasn't alone when he left. The woman in the waiting room, Laurel said. It wasn't a question. Pamela's jaw tightened. One of the nurses saw her too. She reported it to security. They pulled the camera footage. She reached into her bag and pulled out her phone. Laurel, before you look at anything, I need you to know that what I'm about to tell you is documented. It's real. It's not something I'm saying because I've never liked him. Just tell me. While the monitors were flatlining, while they were doing compressions, she was in that hallway and she was laughing. The heart monitor beside Laurel's bed beeped faster. A nurse poked her head in. Laurel held up one hand, I'm fine, and waited until the door clicked shut again. What's her name? Laurel asked. The nurse who filed the report wrote her down as a visitor. She signed in as Courtney Walsh. She works with Derek, has for about 2 years. 2 years. Laurel did the math without wanting to. Her daughter was 4 days old. Her marriage was apparently 2 years old in the wrong direction. She looked at the ceiling. Then she said very quietly, I want to see my baby. They brought her to the NICU in a wheelchair. The unit smelled like warm plastic and antiseptic and something underneath both of those things that Laurel could only describe as effort. The smell of tiny bodies working very hard just to exist. Her daughter was in an isolette in the 3rd row. She weighed 4 pounds 2 ounces. She had Laurel's nose and a head of dark hair that the nurses had smoothed into a small curl. She had her hands balled into fists beside her face like she was already preparing for an argument. "Hi," Laurel said. Her voice came out strange, wet and broken and more honest than anything she'd said in months. "I'm your mom. I'm sorry it took me a minute to get here." The baby didn't open her eyes but her fist uncurled, just slightly. "I'm going to name you Eleanor," Laurel said. She hadn't planned it. It was her grandmother's name. A woman who had raised 5 children on her own after her husband walked out and had lived to 91 and never once described herself as anything other than fine. Eleanor rose, "And you're going to be fine, we both are." She sat there for 2 hours. Nurses came and went. Someone brought her a cup of terrible coffee. Derek did not come. On her 3rd day in the hospital, a security officer named Officer Brenda Whitfield came to her room carrying a tablet. She was a heavy-set woman with a no-nonsense expression and eyes that had seen enough to be kind without being naive. "The nurse who filed the initial report asked me to show you the footage," she said. "I want to warn you that it is difficult to watch, but I also believe you have a right to see it." The footage showed the waiting room at 9:22 p.m. 12 minutes before Laurel had coded. Derek was there. He was sitting in one of the chairs near the window, elbows on his knees, head down. He looked like a man trying to disappear into himself. And then Courtney Walsh walked in carrying a coffee cup. She sat beside him. She said something. He looked up. At 9:31 p.m. the code blue light came on in the hallway. Nurses started running. Through the small window into the delivery room, you could see the shape of the chaos, bodies moving fast, equipment being repositioned. Derek stood up. Courtney put her hand on his arm and pulled him back down. She looked toward the delivery room window and she smiled. Not a twitch, not a nervous reflex, a slow, satisfied smile, the kind of smile that doesn't require explanation because it says exactly what it means. Then she laughed. She covered her mouth with one hand, not from grief, from something closer to delight, and her shoulders shook. The nurse running past in the hallway slowed for a half second, looked at her, and then continued running. That was the nurse who had filed the report. Derek was watching Courtney. His expression was unreadable at first, and then it cracked into something that looked like horror. He pulled his arm away from her hand. He stood up again. He looked toward the delivery room. He did not go in. He sat back down. The footage ended. Officer Whitfield tapped at the fasten on the bedside table. "I've made copies," she said. "Multiple angles, full timestamp documentation. They're yours. I hope you get what you need." She stood to leave, then paused. "I've worked hospital security for 11 years. I have never filed a report like this one before." After she left, Pamela came in with takeout that neither of them touched. "I want a divorce lawyer," Laurel said. "The best one you can find." Today, Pamela found her Miriam Schaefer, who operated out of a corner office downtown and had a reputation for being precise, thorough, and entirely without mercy when the situation called for it. Miriam watched the security footage all the way through without changing expression. Then she watched it again. "This is remarkable documentation," she said when it ended, "in the best possible way for your case. I want to be direct with you. What you have here, the footage, the hospital records showing he was present but uninvolved during a medical emergency, the confirmation that he left during your surgery to be with another woman, this is as clean as a case gets. I want full custody of Eleanor," Laurel said. "I want the house. I want him to have nothing to do with her medical decisions, school decisions, any decisions, and I want it done fast." "We'll file emergency custody papers today," Miriam said. "The footage will go in with the initial filing. His attorney will receive everything simultaneously. He will not have time to build a counter-narrative." "Has he contacted you since the delivery?" "He sent a text," Laurel said. 2 days after, it said he needed space to process everything. He needed space. Miriam wrote something on her notepad. His wife nearly died in labor while he sat in the waiting room with his girlfriend, and he needed space. That about covers it." Miriam set down her pen. "I'll need you to be prepared for the counter-response. Men in his situation frequently attempt to reframe the narrative when they realize the consequences are real. He may claim emotional distress. He may claim that your documentation of events constitutes harassment. He may try to position himself as the victim of a difficult situation. Let him try." Miriam smiled for the first time. It was a small professional smile, but it was real. "I was hoping you'd say that." Derek was served with divorce and custody papers on a Thursday. His attorney called Miriam on Friday morning, angry and loud. Miriam relayed the conversation to Laurel in a single sentence: "He's scared." What Derek did next was the thing Laurel had not anticipated. She was home, staying with Pamela, still pumping milk every 3 hours, still driving to the NICA every morning and sitting beside Eleanor's isolette until visiting hours ended, when a second set of legal documents arrived. Derek was filing for joint custody. His paperwork described Laurel as emotionally unstable following the birth, claimed that her decision to pursue aggressive legal action was evidence of an unfit mental state, and proposed that he and Courtney Walsh would provide a more stable home environment for Eleanor. He had actually put that in writing, Courtney Walsh's name, as a proposed co-parent. When Eleanor was not yet 3 weeks old, Laurel read it twice to make sure she was reading it correctly. Then she called Miriam. "He just made this significantly easier," Miriam said. "We were being restrained. We don't have to be anymore." Her voice had a quality that Laurel was beginning to recognize as the professional equivalent of cracking her knuckles. "We file everything. The footage, the nurse testimonies, the hospital records, your therapy notes from the past 2 weeks, every social media post he made during the week you were hospitalized. All of it." "He posted on social media?" There was a pause. "He did. Do you want to know what he posted?" She didn't. But she said yes anyway. While Laurel had been unconscious in the ICU, Derek had posted a sunset photo. The caption read, "Grateful for clarity. Some chapters have to close for new ones to begin." 47 people had liked it. Courtney had commented a single red heart. 3 days later, while Eleanor was in the NIC fighting for every ounce, he had posted a photo from a restaurant. Good food, better company. The background, barely visible in the reflection of the window behind him, showed Courtney Walsh laughing at something off camera. Laurel set her phone face down on Pamela's kitchen table. "All of it," she said. "Release everything." Miriam filed their response brief 2 days later. It was 47 pages. It included the security footage, the nurse statements, the hospital records, the social media documentation, and a declaration from Eleanor's NICU physician, confirming that Derek had visited his daughter exactly once in the 3 weeks since her birth, for a duration of 23 minutes, during which he had not held her. By the following weekend, a local journalist had gotten hold of the story. Laurel had not tipped anyone off. She suspected Miriam hadn't either, though she never asked directly. The truth was that 47 people had liked that sunset post, and some of them had also seen the news coverage, and the internet is a very small place when a story has the right shape. The headline read, "Local man abandons wife in labor for girlfriend. Hospital footage reveals girlfriend laughing during emergency." Her phone went quiet for about 6 hours while the internet processed the information. Then it erupted. The messages that came were mostly from women. Some were strangers who had found her through mutual connections. Some were women she hadn't spoken to in years. All of them said variations of the same thing. "I am so sorry. You are not alone." Derek's social media went private. Courtney's did too. It was too late. Eleanor came home 5 weeks after she was born. She was 5 pounds 11 ounces and had graduated from the isolette to a bassinet 2 days early because, as the NICU charge nurse put it, she had simply decided she was done. Laurel carried her through Pamela's front door wrapped in a yellow blanket, and she sat down on the couch and held her for a long time without speaking. Pamela sat beside her. Outside, a sprinkler somewhere was running. Cars went by. The ordinary world continued doing ordinary things. "I don't know what I'm doing," Laurel said. She hadn't slept more than 3 hours in a row since the delivery. "Nobody does," Pamela said. "You do it anyway." The custody hearing was scheduled for 6 weeks later. In the meantime, Derek's attorney filed 2 motions to delay and 1 letter claiming that Laurel's media presence. She had given exactly 1 brief statement to a local television station and had not otherwise spoken publicly, constituted a pattern of harassment toward his client. Miriam's response to this letter was 4 sentences. The last sentence read, "If Mr. Hutchins is concerned about the causes of document facts, he is encouraged to reflect on why those facts exist." Derek didn't come to the courthouse on the day of the hearing. He sent his attorney alone. The judge was a woman in her late 50s with reading glasses pushed up into silver hair and an expression that suggested she had reviewed approximately everything and was not easily impressed. She reviewed the footage. She reviewed the statements from 3 hospital nurses. She reviewed Derek's visitation record. 1 visit, 23 minutes, no physical contact with the child. "I'd like to ask counsel," she said, setting down the page she was reading, "whether your client intends to argue that this level of involvement represents a parent who should share custody of a 5-week-old infant." Derek's attorney said something about mental health struggles and the difficulty of the situation. The judge looked at him over her glasses for a moment. "Full custody is awarded to the mother," she said. "Father may petition for supervised visitation after completing a parenting evaluation and demonstrating consistent support payments. The court will schedule review in 6 months." She turned the page. Next case. Miriam walked out of the courthouse beside Laurel and said nothing for half a block. Then she said, "That's the fastest I've ever seen that judge move." Is that good? It means she'd already made up her mind before she sat down. The months that followed were the hardest Laurel had ever lived through. She went back to work as a physical therapist when Eleanor was 8 weeks old, leaving her daughter with Pamela 3 days a week and a part-time sitter the other 2. She pumped in a supply closet on her lunch breaks. She fell asleep on Pamela's couch 3 times a week and woke up at 2 a.m. to Eleanor crying and somehow found the energy to get up because there was no other option. She also started writing. It started as journaling, a cheap spiral notebook she bought at the pharmacy and filled with things she couldn't say out loud yet. About the night in the delivery room, about the footage, about the particular kind of grief that comes with losing someone who is still alive, who chose to leave, who made the leaving look easy. After 3 notebooks, Pamela read a few pages and said, "You should post this somewhere." "Absolutely not," Laurel said, but she was thinking about it. She created an account, anonymous, no photo, just a username and her words, and posted 3 entries about the delivery, the recovery and what it felt like to drive to the NICU every day past the window where she'd seen Courtney Walsh standing. Within a week she had 4,000 followers. Within a month she had 60,000. The messages were relentless, but not in the way she'd feared. They were from women who had sat in hospital parking lots unable to go inside. From women whose husbands had missed births for reasons that were not traffic delays. From women who had been handed a version of their life that they hadn't agreed to, and were trying to figure out what to do with it. She answered every message for the first 2 weeks, then the volume made that impossible, and she started posting longer responses that addressed the questions that came up most often. How do you trust yourself when the person who was supposed to know you best didn't see you at all? How do you explain it to your daughter someday without making her feel like the reason everything fell apart? How do you stop being angry long enough to actually heal? She didn't have all the answers. She said so plainly. She thought that was probably why people kept reading. Derek, from what Pamela reported through secondhand sources, was not doing well. He had left his job, or been asked to leave. The story varied depending on who was telling it. He and Courtney had stopped being seen together publicly around the time the news coverage peaked. He had missed the first 3 supervised visitation appointments that Miriam had scheduled as part of the custody agreement. He had not paid child support in 2 months when Miriam filed for contempt. He's dismantling his own life, Miriam told Laurel at their monthly check-in. We don't have to do anything. I know, Laurel said. It doesn't feel as satisfying as I thought it would. It rarely does, Miriam said. The satisfaction comes later, and it comes from what you build, not from watching someone else fall. Eleanor was 7 months old the first time she laughed, a real laugh. Not a reflex, not a gas bubble, but an actual open-mouthed, surprised laugh at a spoon Laurel was tapping against a bowl. Laurel had been in the middle of trying to eat her own breakfast and she stopped completely. Because the sound was extraordinary, and she wanted to make sure she'd actually heard it. She picked Eleanor up and spun her around the kitchen and Eleanor laughed again, twice, and Laurel stood there in her socked feet on the linoleum, feeling something she had forgotten was possible. She was happy, not relieved, not surviving, not making it through another day. Actually, quietly, irreversibly happy. She posted about it that night. Just a few sentences about the laugh and what it felt like to find your reason for continuing in a very specific sound. The post got more comments than anything she had written before. Not because it was dramatic, because it wasn't. Her following grew to 200,000. A literary agent reached out asking if she'd ever considered writing a book. She had not, but she said she would think about it and she was only half lying. In the middle of all of this, she met a man named Thomas. She hadn't been looking. She had actively not been looking, with the deliberate focus of someone who has learned that looking for something while running from something else produces poor results. She was managing a caseload of 14 patients and a 7-month-old, and a growing platform and a pending divorce. She had neither the time nor the emotional bandwidth for anything additional. Thomas was the father of one of her patients. His son, a 9-year-old named Charlie, had broken his wrist in a skateboarding incident, and was working through 8 weeks of post-cast physical therapy, with approximately 0 patients for the process. Thomas brought him to every session, and waited in the chairs outside the treatment room, and did not once come in to hover or offer unsolicited opinions, which Laurel appreciated more than she could have explained. After the 4th session he met her at the front desk as she was finalizing Charlie's discharge paperwork and said, "He talks about you a lot. He says you're the only one who doesn't make him feel like a little kid." "He's not a little kid," Laurel said. "He's just impatient, it's different." Thomas smiled. He had the look of someone who had done a significant amount of sleeping on the couch of his own grief and had gotten up and made coffee anyway. She would learn later that his wife had died of a heart condition 18 months earlier, sudden and total, a Tuesday morning in March. That he had spent the following year learning to be both parents at once, and that Charlie's wrist had been broken on the first real outing they'd had since. A Saturday afternoon at the skate park, which Thomas had agreed to partly out of guilt and partly because Charlie's therapist said normal activities were important. "He's going to be fine," Laurel told him. Kids his age are remarkably resilient when you give them a framework. I'm learning that, Thomas said. He didn't ask for her number. He thanked her and left with Charlie, who waved from the door without looking back. She thought about the conversation on and off for 2 weeks. He showed up again at the clinic's open house in March. Charlie's school had done a partnership visit, and Thomas was one of the parents who had come along. They ended up in the same conversation about pediatric recovery timelines, which eventually drifted into a conversation about Charlie's adjustment to middle school and then, somehow, into a conversation about their respective experiences of rebuilding a life from something that had broken it. He knew about her platform. He said so directly without awkwardness. I found your account when Charlie was still in the cast. He was having a rough week and I was looking for something to read at 2 in the morning. A friend had shared one of your posts. Which one? She asked. The one about how Eleanor's laugh changed things, he said. I read it about 6 times. She did not say anything for a moment. She was thinking about the right response to that, and she was also thinking that she had not felt this particular variety of off-balance in a very long time, and that it was not entirely unwelcome. I'm not in a position to date anyone right now, she said. It was true. It was also, she realized as she said it, slightly less true than it had been 3 months ago. I'm not asking, Thomas said. I just thought you should know that what you're writing matters. It helped me. It probably helped more people than you know. He left with the other parents a few minutes later. She went home, settled Eleanor into her crib, and sat in the kitchen with a cup of tea and her phone. She did not look Thomas up. She sat with the feeling instead, which was something her therapist had been encouraging her to do for months. She accepted his invitation to coffee 2 months later. They went to a place near the clinic on a Saturday morning, Charlie at a friend's house, Eleanor with Pamela. They talked for 3 hours. About grief, which was the obvious shared territory. About single parenting, which had its own particular landscape of small victories and invisible exhaustions. About what it meant to be further along in recovery than you'd expected and not entirely sure what to do with the space that opened up. Do you miss him? Thomas asked. He meant Derek. He was not afraid of the direct question, which she was finding she appreciated more than she would have predicted. I miss who I thought he was, she said. There's a difference. The person I was married to didn't really exist, or he existed differently than I understood. What I miss is the story I thought I was living. Yeah, Thomas said. That's the one that's hard to grieve. The person's gone, or in your case, revealed themselves to be someone you wouldn't choose. But the story. He stopped. The story is harder. His wife died, Laurel said, not to him but slightly sideways, addressing the thought. And I can't imagine. But in some ways you and I lost the same thing. The version of our life that we thought we were building. Thomas looked at her for a moment. My therapist says the goal is to build a new story, he said. Not to finish the old one. Do you believe that? I'm getting there, he said. Some days more than others. They went to coffee again 3 weeks later. And then again. There was nothing dramatic about it. There was no moment of sweeping certainty, no thunderclap realization. There was just the gradual accumulation of evidence that this person was consistent, and honest, and genuinely interested in her, in a way that had nothing to do with requiring something from her. Eleanor met Charlie before Laurel and Thomas had put any formal name on what they were doing. The children spent a Saturday afternoon at the park while Pamela chaperoned, and Laurel and Thomas walked 2 paces behind and talked the whole time. Charlie pushed Eleanor in the swing and she laughed, that extraordinary laugh, and Charlie looked delighted and confused in equal measure. She's got good energy, Charlie said afterward, as if evaluating a coworker. She does, Laurel agreed. The book came out 11 months after the night Laurel had coded in the delivery room. She titled it Still Here, because that was the most honest thing she knew to say about what had happened. She had been there, she had almost not been. She was still there. Eleanor was still there. Everything that followed was evidence of that. It debuted modestly, then climbed. By the 2nd week it was in the top 10. By the 3rd it had found its way into recommendations from therapists and divorce attorneys and women's group leaders across 3 states. The reviews were what she hadn't expected. Not the positive ones, those were generous but predictable. What she hadn't expected were the letters. Real letters, handwritten, sent to her publisher and forwarded to her in batches. From women who had read the book in hospital rooms. From a woman who had read it in a parking lot before going back inside to sign her own divorce papers. From a man who had written to say he was Derek in this story, and that he had read it, and that he was in therapy, and that he did not expect forgiveness, but wanted her to know it had made him reckon with something real. She read that one twice. Then she set it down and went into the kitchen and stood at the window for a while. She didn't write back, but she didn't throw it away. The divorce was finalized 10 months after Eleanor's birth. Derek had missed 11 of the 12 supervised visitation appointments that had been offered to him. Miriam filed the documentation and the court noted it. His child support was in arrears by 4 months. His attorney had withdrawn from the case. He had, from what Pamela could find, moved to another city and was working somewhere that didn't require a professional license. Courtney Walsh had left the company where she and Derek had worked. She had tried briefly to post a public account of her own perspective on the situation. It lasted 4 days before she deleted it. The internet does not forget, and it had not forgotten the security footage. Laurel had not watched the footage again after the first time. She knew it existed. She knew it was documented. She did not need to carry it with her in order to move forward. She had decided, somewhere around Eleanor's 4th month, that there were 2 ways to survive a betrayal. You could build your entire recovery on top of the rubble of what had been done to you, stacking every new thing on the foundation of the wound. Or you could eventually, not immediately, not easily but eventually, move the construction site entirely. Build on new ground, let the rubble be the rubble. She was building on new ground. Eleanor was 14 months old. The first time she pulled herself up to standing in the living room, and looked around with the expression of someone who had just solved a problem they hadn't been sure they could solve. Laurel was 3 feet away and watched it happen and did not breathe for a full 2 seconds. Then Eleanor sat back down, looked at her mother and clapped. "Yeah," Laurel said. "I know exactly how you feel." Thomas was there. He had started spending Saturday mornings at Pamela's, which had migrated to Laurel's apartment once she'd gotten her own place. A 2-bedroom in a building with a small yard that Eleanor could graduate into when she was old enough to want it. He was there the morning Eleanor walked 3 steps between the coffee table and the couch. He was the one who said quietly, so as not to startle her, "Keep going, kid," and she had. There was no dramatic declaration between Laurel and Thomas. There was instead a gradual and fully conscious decision that they were both making every time they chose to show up. She had told him early that she needed consistency above everything else. He had shown up consistently. Not perfectly, he was managing his own grief, his son's adjustment, his own reconstruction, but consistently. He was honest when he was overwhelmed. He said what he needed directly and listened when she said what she needed. It was nothing like what she'd had before. It was better. She posted about him on the platform eventually, not by name, not with photos, but enough that the women who had been following her story understood that something had shifted. The response was what she'd expected. Some people were delighted. Some were cautious, warning her. A few were openly skeptical. She addressed it in a single post. "I am not looking for someone to complete me. I completed myself. I am looking for someone to build alongside. There's a difference and I'm learning to trust it." Derek saw the posts, she assumed. She had no evidence of this and had stopped checking. It didn't matter. His opinion of her choices had become structurally irrelevant to her life. The way the opinion of a stranger at a bus stop is irrelevant. Not hostile, not wished ill, simply not a factor. The last time she heard anything concrete about him was through Miriam, who noted in a routine update that he had made 2 consecutive child support payments, and had reached out through his new attorney, requesting information about reinstating visitation. Miriam had sent the standard documentation about the required parenting evaluation. Laurel had instructed her to proceed according to whatever the court would require. She did not lie awake thinking about it. Eleanor was 16 months old, pulling up on everything, saying mama and mo, which meant more, and a sound that was almost certainly high when she looked at someone she recognized. She weighed 22 pounds and had opinions about her socks and a favorite book about a duck that required reading at least twice per sitting. She did not know her father. She would, someday, have questions. Laurel had already started thinking carefully about what the true and kind and honest answers to those questions might look like. How to give Eleanor the facts without building her identity on top of someone else's failure. One evening she was reading the duck book for the 3rd time when Eleanor looked up at her with the specific expression, open, total, undefended, that Laurel had come to think of as her daughter's most private face. The one she reserved for moments when she was not performing being a baby but simply being herself. "Hi," Eleanor said. "Hi," Laurel said back. It was the whole story, really. She had been in a hospital room not quite 2 years ago, with no clear path out, and now she was here, in an apartment she had chosen, with a daughter she had named herself, building a life that belonged entirely and completely to them. She had not won because Derek had lost. Derek had lost because of Derek. She had won because she had refused even in the worst possible moment to stop. She turned the page to the duck. Eleanor pointed at it and said very seriously, "Mo." "Yes," Laurel said. "More."